How are we doing, folks? So, as of right now, this is my current understanding as to the map of politics. So, we have politics that is divided into 5 sections according to Maslow's pyramid of needs and the political systems that are associated with that. So, at the bottom, we have economics. Right over that, we have statism, with the study of how the state functions. This is what is taught in basically liberal countries as political science. Then we have the familial system of a society, its culture, and its religion. Each one of these things have been focused on throughout history to differing extents, but each and every one of them are critically important to human society and functioning. So let's start off with economics. Now, according to Maslowian theory and dialectical materialism, material conditions and material needs are the most important thing. You need to form your society based off of economics before you form it over anything else. You should be working from the bottom top, all right? And the reason you should be doing that is because more people are going to prioritize stuff at the bottom more than things more at the top. There are, of course, going to be some people that prioritize stuff up at the top the most, but they are typically in the minority. When in reality, most people are just going to go for economics. So let's look at economics. Now, economics is a self-destroying cycle, which is why I have depicted it as a snake eating its own tail. Modern economics is stuck in a vicious cycle between only 5 nodes. I call them nodes. They're really spectrums, but they always end up at the same spot. If you look at the definition of communism, you'll find out that it's really no different from pre-civilization societies. And I don't really like using that term, but that's the term that's used. Communism is more along the lines of hunter-gatherer societies. And in reality, no matter what you do, you're not going to find a system outside of these 5 systems. You might find some in the middle, in between or something, but it is basically impossible to find something outside of these systems. Now, you can find a different flavor, which is why there is this square here. So this square focuses on the different attitudes you can have towards these different nodes. You can think of each of these squares being a separate snake. So here we have pragmatism. Pragmatism basically means that, always assume worst case scenario. If you always assume the worst case scenario, then that will ensure that, you're prepared for when people mess up. Then its opposite is utopianism, which is pursuing and assuming the best possible scenario. So that with the idea that being that if you pursue the best possible scenario, you're at least going to get close. Then we have materialism. Materialism basically means that, it doesn't matter what's the best and what's the worst possible scenario. That does not matter. All right. What matters is, the material conditions, how things function, creating incentive structures to set up your society. Then we have its opposite, which is essentialism, which basically is like we should pursue aspects assuming that people are going to be awful, but also pursuing the virtues of utopianism. Basically, it's pursuing ideals over material conditions. So this pursues material conditions over all else. This pursues ideals over all else. All right? We have to remember, economics is a self-devouring force. Now we have statism. State is how security, or lack thereof, manifests. And the state, I decided to draw it like a pyramid going from the top down because effectively that's how it goes. Because that's how these things go. And it's split between 2 sections. So we have monarchy. So basically we have the actual distribution of power, and we have how a country or society is split up. So at the top, we have the highest concentration of power and the highest conglomeration of regions, which is monarchy and unitary. I'm not talking about monarchy as in a constitutional monarchy. A constitutional monarchy can mean anything. No, I'm talking about a true, legit monarchy, like an absolute monarchy. Then we have state dictatorship. Now, what the difference between state dictatorship is? State dictatorship is defined as a particular group of people that enforce their control over society. We are using that term of dictatorship. All right, and that's compared with imperialism. Now, this definition of imperialism basically means that the motherland is unitary, but it has subjugated states around it or under it. That's only purpose is to feed the motherland. Then below state dictatorship, we got republic. We're defining republic as basically a situation where there is a high concentration of power under a semi-democratic system. So basically, a regulated democracy is basically what a republic is. So it's not quite to the point where there is a particular group of people that insists on control, but it's also not fully democratic. So it's like, it's what the U.S. government calls checks and balances. But in contrast to that, we have hegemonic, which basically means that there's kind of this hierarchy of regions that are where the lowest regions are subjugated to others, which are subjugated to others, which finally maybe coalesce into a handful of motherlands. Then we finally enter into democracy, and for this we're talking about representative democracy. We're talking about a situation where you elect representatives, and those representatives have full power. They have the full authority over the legal, executive, and judicial branches of government. Then, in comparison to that, we have federalism. And federalism is basically where you create a set of equal subregions that are under a national government. Okay? So then we move on to monarchy. Monarchy is basically the same as democracy, except the priority of monarchy is not the development of law. It's not rule. A monarchy believes that people can rule themselves. A democracy believes that representatives are necessary for people to rule themselves. Okay? So a monarchy basically says we create the laws and incentive structures so that people can run their own lives. Democracy says we elect representatives so that those representatives can then rule people's lives. Feels like splitting hairs, but it's really not. Then we have confederalism, which is basically where you have a bunch of equal subunits and you don't have a national government, but you also have like a common alliance. So you're still like working together, but there's not an actual national government type of thing that actually has authority over those subunits. Anyway, then we have anarchy. Anarchy is basically the absence of government. That's really its definition. Any flavor of anarchy you want, I don't care. And then we have supranational, which basically means that, those subunits, the national government is kind of just a suggestion at that point. It doesn't really mean much. That's why I represented it with the UN, because at this point the UN is pretty much a suggestion, a glorified suggestion. So that's statism. Now we're going to move on to familial system. And this is really important because the hand that rocks the cradle rules the world. That is a very true statement. But familial systems, as far as I understand it, now I honestly realize that I'm probably wrong. I'm probably missing something because it shouldn't be as simple as just a little cube. But as far as I know, it's a cube. And it's got 3 axes with 3 points each. So we have clan, nuclear, and non-parental. Basically, you can think of this as societies that prioritize the old or gerontocracy. Societies that don't really prioritize a particular age, and then societies that prioritize children. So that's basically what it is. Then we have, a society's perspective on gender, which is pre-binary. So before the gender binary is established, binary, and then gender abolition. So pre-binary would be there are genders, but they're usually like slave is a gender. Binary is basically man, woman. And then gender abolition is you're trying to get rid of the concept of gender altogether. Then we have the third axis, which is trophy society, a society where, marriage is based off of getting a bunch of trophy partners. That's called polygamy. Then we have monogamy, which is where it's only acceptable to have one singular partner in a relationship. And then we have polyamory, which is more of an egalitarian version that has no trophy attachment to it of polygamy, or at least that's the goal. Doesn't always work that way, but. And finally, we got religion. Now, if you notice, I skipped culture. Really, culture's just divided between welcoming and unwelcoming cultures. That's really the defining feature. So it's not really that, it's like a coin flip, that it doesn't really matter that much. But with religion, that does kind of matter. Self-actualization of religion, that has more complexity to it. Religion is a web of nothings on nothings that mean everything. So what do I mean by that? Well, I'm mostly talking about how religion, you can't define religion. Religion's like a big old soup, all right? And one religion is like a particular wave stuck in that soup. And technically, that wave is related to all these other waves that kind of ripple out from it. But it's still a soup. You can't really divide one religion from another until you get like really far away. So like people on the opposite side, yeah, they're obviously very different from each other, but they're also related. So it's like this weird four-dimensional soup thing. But I tried my best. The religion is extremely important because it means everything to the people it means stuff to. Okay? It means everything. And so I try my best to map out the biggest nodes and their potential connections. So the biggest nodes, there are four biggest nodes. There are Abrahamic religions, Dharmic religions, occultic religions, and Spiritist religions. So Abrahamic religions are Christianity, Judaism, Islam, and Baha'i, I think is how you pronounce it. Dharmic religions, that's like Buddhism, Hinduism, all that stuff. All the Eastern religions. I don't know them all. I don't think anybody does. Occultic religions would be, arguably, you'd put atheism in this. Because most of the occultic religions come out of Enlightenment philosophy. But basically, it's Enlightenment religion is pretty much what you think of it. And Spiritists, that's basically just indigenous religion. And they are, there's big differences between them, but they are basically, they have some really close similarities that make them very different from all four of these. Now, Abrahamic religions are more closely related to Dharmic religions and occultic religions. Spiritist religions are also related to these two, but these two are, it forms a square, basically, is what I'm saying. It's very difficult, and that's why they're represented by two lines. Two lines represents stronger connection. But there's also these one-line connections across, indicating that there are weak connections between their opposites. So let's look at some of the connections that exist. For example, if you take Dharmic religion and an Abrahamic religion, and you combine them, you get, the concept of those two religious groups kind of makes Zoroastrianism. You mix Abrahamic religions and occultic religions, those two groups kind of make deism. Occultic and Spiritist, you kind of get Neo-Shamanism. Spiritist and Dharmic, you kind of get Taoism. Then if you go to the opposites, you start mixing people's opposites. You mix Abrahamic and Spiritist, you kind of get the Gnostics. you mix dharmics with occultics, you kind of get Thelemites. But basically, the thing that you have to realize is that this is a very rough explanation. It's like you threw a bunch of rice in a pot full of water in zero gravity, and you tried to map out all of the ripples and how they interact with each other. That's how religion works. You're not going to fully understand it based off of a little infographic. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you want to support the channel, like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. See y'all!